Hey everybody, Mike Tenney here at the Tenney School. We're here for Tenney Vlog number 6. And this is a big one. We're doing some new things here today. You may be able to see down below we have a lower third, which should make it easier for you guys to see what we're talking about. And today's topic I think is a big one. We're going to talk about secrets of college admissions. And we're looking at it from the perspective of the college admissions officer. And kind of another big new thing we're doing here today is we're bringing a guest expert in.
It's my pleasure.
Danny Kahalley.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to be a part of this.
So Danny is a good friend of mine. We have gotten to know each other because we're both on the board of Houston Area Independent Schools. The website is houstonprivateschools.org.
Check it out. It's a good website.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this man has had a lot to do with it. So
well,
kudos.
Thank you. So Danny is the admissions director for St. Thomas Episcopal School. Mm-hmm. And so we're representing our schools on that board together. And the reason why you're going to get a lot from hearing from Danny today is because he has been a college admissions officer in the past. Mm-hmm. So before we kind of get rolling into our topic, can you just give our audience just a little bit of a background on you?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks for the intro.
Sure.
Makes me sound important. That's always fun.
Yeah.
So I guess where I cut my teeth in college admissions was at Rhodes College, which is a small liberal arts college in Memphis, Tennessee, about 1,800 students. And I was assistant director of admissions there. Really had a lot of responsibility in terms of application review, in terms of travel responsibilities to schools to talk to students, event planning, really kind of the whole spectrum. So I worked at Rhodes in their admissions office for about 4 years.
Okay.
And then when we made the move to Texas, worked in a medical school for a bit and some other places, but ended up working for the University of Alabama as what's called a regional recruiter. So regional recruiters are becoming more and more common, but they're basically admissions representatives that universities will put in place in sort of designated geographical areas. So I was really sort of the voice and face of the University of Alabama in Houston and sort of surrounding areas. So that's my background in college admissions. So I've worked both for small private liberal arts and for large state university, and love them both, but they're a very different feel. Well,
and I think that is what gives you, I think, a lot more depth in how to talk about this subject is small versus large, public versus private. Local versus the local office versus a region, someone who's distant from the school. The other thing that I thought about was, so when were you at Rhodes?
I was at Rhodes. I started there in 1999.
Okay, so you've got also a present day perspective versus back, not when the internet was new, but when it was newer.
But a lot has changed.
A lot has changed, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think just your overall experiences in doing college admissions will help you kind of decode this a little bit for our audience.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay, so the secrets of college admissions. So why don't you give us? So
they're secrets, so I can't share them. I'd be kicked out of the secret club of college admissions people.
So you've got an interesting framework that you use to break this down for people to explain how do you become attractive to a college. So we're going to kind of go down topic by topic and then dig into those a little bit. So
it's really mysterious. Families going through this, especially if it's your first one that's going off to college, you just don't have an idea. You don't know what these people on the other side of the wall are looking at or how they're evaluating applicants. So I kind of came up with, it's not solely me, but I use this example of the 5 Ps to talk to families about how to process all of that. And those 5 Ps would be program, performance, potential, personality, and participation. So what that means is that those 5 Ps on some level are what really all colleges and universities will look at. Not all universities look at all 5 Ps. Some of them look at them all, but in varying degrees of importance in how they arrive at their decisions. But encapsulated in those 5 Ps are kind of the main things that most admissions offices will look at.
Okay, so let's dive into P number 1, the program. So what is a program?
So program is best represented as the classes a student's taking.
Okay.
So really transcript, and if they're taking advanced placement courses or IB courses, International Baccalaureate, or honors courses. So given your program, how are you as a student challenging yourself given the curriculum?
Okay, and so I will, just full disclosure here, I do also do some admissions work for my school, the Air Force Academy, and I know that they actually give extra points. They give the same weighting to kids that are taking advanced placement or IB or dual credit is the third category, that they will give them additional points on their admissions file if they're challenging themselves with those programmed courses.
Sure.
Okay, so the program is basically how hard were the classes you took.
Right, and what classes did you take? And are they, if you're applying to a school of engineering, you know, have you had the math and science courses in high school to best facilitate your entry into that school? And so, yeah.
Okay. All right, and then the second P was performance.
Right, and performance is basically how you've performed given your program. So out of the classes that you've taken, you know, what's your GPA, your class rank, how well have you done in those classes? So, you know, a common question I think from a lot of people is, if my child is a straight A student but not taking honors or AP or IB or dual credit, is that better than if my student's taking those harder classes but not doing as well? And my answer is always, well, colleges want both. They want students who are taking those challenging classes and doing well in those classes and scoring, you know, A's, B's. If you're, you know, I would probably say if you're scoring C's or below, arguably you're not really picking up the content in a way that you should be. But that's basically what performance is how well you're doing given your program and your transcript and your curriculum and the classes you've chosen.
And I mean, from a performance standpoint, a B in an AP class is the same as most schools give an extra point for...
Correct, in the GPA, right.
So you're, all else being equal, if you can make a B in an AP class versus an A in an academic class, your program is going to be better, but your performance is going to be equal.
Right, so, that's a good way to frame it. Challenge yourself. If, you know, you don't have to knock it out of the park, as long as you can do well in that class, you're right. That's a good way to frame it. Okay.
So the third P is potential.
Is potential. So with potential, think of standardized testing.
Okay.
You know, primarily that's going to be the SAT, the ACT, or SAT2 subject tests that colleges will look at. And we look at it as potential because we put it in the context of, you know, again, your program, your performance, and this gives us an idea of a more broad standardization of your high school in comparison with all the high schools around the nation that a particular college or university is getting applicants from. So it does give a measure of, it gives a measurement across all those boundaries where, you know, different schools are going to, some may offer no AP classes, some might offer 1 or 2, some might offer 25. So standardization helps with that a bit.
And I think with, so I'm a little off the cuff here, but so the two main entrance exams you can take are the ACT and the SAT. The ACT more leans towards an achievement type test, is my understanding, and the SAT is more of an aptitude type test.
Scholastic aptitude test, and an ACT is American College test, if I'm not mistaken. You can Google that.
I think
that's right.
We're getting into dangerous territory. But that SAT, it's not supposed to necessarily just measure how much did you learn in college or in high school. It's supposed to be a measure of, well, what is your potential in college? What's your aptitude?
Right. And you know, I would encourage students to take both personally, because just some students test better with one than they do the other. Test prep is probably a subject for a whole nother video blog, but that, I think, it's probably become the standard, whereas most families are doing, you know, test prep. And, you know, sometimes that's as simple as going to Barnes & Noble and purchasing a test prep book with a CD and maybe just getting a measure of comfort with taking those kind of standardized tests. But, yeah, I think it's good advice to probably go ahead and take 2. And then, you know, to go further down that rabbit hole, some schools will super score, meaning you could take the test multiple times. They'll take the aggregate from different tests, the subsections of different tests to form your composite score that they go off of. Some colleges don't do that. That's why it's always a good idea to check with the specific admissions policies with each school. That's right. But But yeah, so that's potential.
Okay.
You know, the
All right.
standardized testing.
So what are you possible? What's your upper limit, and
Right.
and what kind of indicators do they have of what that would be for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the fourth P was personality.
Personality, yeah. So, you know, we often hear when a student does poorly at tests, well, I'm just a bad test taker. So this gives you a way to mediate that a little bit.
Okay.
And you'll usually see personality in an applicant through an interview that's often a part of the application process, through a student's essay that is included with the application. What else? Teacher recommendations are a good way to assess personality as well. So it helps because, you know, a file is literally a collection of papers. So you're looking at data, trying to make certain assumptions on a person. So the personality fills in the humanity of those numbers, and you know, gives you a more complete picture of the person that you're assessing.
Yeah, I know. So for the Air Force Academy, this is a very important question.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of kids that I'll meet that I can just tell, you know, you're really not going to like military school. You don't have the right personality for this. Yeah. And I think the flip side of it is certainly true as well. There's a lot of more liberal arts colleges that are looking for a certain type of personality that's going to fit their culture. Right. So you can see how that would be important, especially at maybe your smaller schools.
Yeah.
Now this kind of begs the question that we all have of, do big schools read the essays?
It depends on the big school, to be fair. Some will. Now, again, I worked at the University of Alabama. If someone tried to hand me an essay and I tried to pass that along to our head office in Tuscaloosa, they'd say, we're not in, you know, don't worry about it. Don't waste the stamp, you know, because it's not going to be read. So in that instance, no, an essay wouldn't be helpful. But there are some state schools or larger private colleges, universities that I'm sure do put a lot of emphasis on the essay.
I would say, so let's step back a little bit and talk about Texas. Yeah. So Texas public schools, we have the top 10% rule.
Sure, which is now, I think, top 7%. It started out at 10% when that was first set, and I think it's gone to 8 and now 7.
Yeah, I think that's for UT specifically, because their number of applicants has been so high, whereas the other schools may not be at 10, like A&M may be a little lower than that. Right. So some schools might not fill that percentage of their applicant pool with the top 10, so they've had to keep the top 10. Right. Whereas UT gets so many of them, they've been able to lower that percentage. But how does that impact admissions, you think?
It depends on who you ask.
Well, and I mean, I think, and I was really, so it was a little bit of a loaded question of me saying, you know, I think probably at UT, they may never get to the essay because they have other factors that they're required to follow.
They do require an essay. I assume, and of course they have like the Plan 2 honors program essentially at UT that I did.
We'll look at the essay.
Well, we'll look at the essay. I heard a representative, a regional recruiter here in the Houston area, once saying that the essay played a hugely important role in the determination of who they chose. I'm not sure outside of Plan 2, other than it's a requirement, as are recommendations, I believe. Sure. You know, I can tell you that working for Rhodes, we went through a very holistic review. And so I would go home, a cup of coffee, a highlighter, and I would literally have a stack of applications I was going through like this. There had to be an efficient way to go through them. I would ballpark that personally I spent about no more than 15 minutes on each application, 12 to 15 minutes.
On each application?
On each application, exactly. The thick ones, I would say I probably would spend 15 minutes on. The thinner ones, maybe around 12 minutes. Yeah. But you become very adept at speeding through them, which is disheartening, I think, for most applicants to hear because they and their parents oftentimes invest so much time. And the essay alone can take weeks to write and edit and go through that. So it's tell me you spend 10 minutes on it, which, you know, interestingly, is about the same with job candidates too. Applying to jobs, I think they say that resumes, you know, it takes like 2 minutes to read a resume, but you have to have every comma in place. You have to have every period,
what
your
you're
grammar,
communicating
your
is very
spelling, all of that. So,
I think at least my perspective, and maybe get your perspective on this too. So if you're on the cut line, just above or just below, I think that's where the essays become important.
I would say that's where everything becomes important, to be honest.
That's true. So you can come in, and if you're a rock star, 4.0, top of your class, got a great SAT score,
it's
the
a
essay
no-brainer.
is not going to be that important.
Right.
But if you're coming in and this is a stretch school for you, and then you need to take advantage of every little point that you can get.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's where a lot of admissions effort is focused, is right there on the ones that are maybe just above the line or just below the line, because the ones that are significantly above don't take a lot of time and a lot of processing. The ones that are below, you're making a decision based on what you feel will be the best interest of the student, and you want to make sure they're successful coming in.
Yeah.
So those ones in the middle are tricky, but you're right. You start really, as an admissions office, starting to what you feel is split hairs with things, because you want to make sure that you're doing what's in the best interest of the student, what's in the best interest of the university, and that aligns, and you're not setting a student up to come to an environment where it's going to be over their head.
Right.
Correct.
Sure.
And so you're right. Then personality may play an even bigger role, and I would even say, open houses or tours or things like that can also play a role in that. And regional recruiters. So admissions officers are often advocates for the applicants that they work with.
Yeah.
So really working to nurture that relationship with those that work at the colleges that you are applying to or you're most interested in is not wasted effort. There are plenty of times that I and others that worked in college admissions will go to bat. They'll talk to your dean or director of admissions and say, this may not look like a good fit on paper, but I've met the student, I've talked to them. Life circumstances have kind of altered things, whether that's a divorce in the family or a death, or made some bad grades because they were so focused on athletics, but have now reshifted that, or whatever the circumstance may be. So it always is good to kind of build that relationship.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we spent a lot of time talking about the fourth P. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So the fifth P is participation.
Participation. So participation is kind of stepping outside of the academic, well, in some respects, but it's basically all the organizations, activities, extracurricular interests that you have, whether those be attached to your school or not. It could be something like scouting, or it could be academic competitions, or it could be athletics, or the fine arts, theater, painting, drawing, hiking, whatever it is that's your passion. And I think what admissions offices like to see is not necessarily a laundry list of everything you can do, but the things that you're really invested in. Okay. So, and we tend to see that through students that hold leadership positions in what they're doing, or dedicating a large percentage of hours of their time outside of class to do. So it could be community service, and you may not be the president of the community service club, but you could really be active in getting involved in a number of different things.
Yeah, and that's, I know the Air Force Academy is unique, but people will always ask me, well, what should I do? And I say, well, it doesn't matter what you do, just pursue leadership in it.
Right.
That communicates more to a school than whether you pick boys state over track. So pursue the things that you're passionate about, and then to the level of trying to be a leader in that community. At least for the Air Force Academy, that's more of the leadership piece.
Of course.
But other schools may not value leadership the same way.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so the 5 Ps: program, performance, potential, personality, and participation.
That's right.
Now, I want to try to let's try to give us a little bit more depth on these.
Okay.
Let's say, big school, small school, public school, private school. How does that impact the 5 Ps? Which school you're talking about?
Well, and it's, you have such a diversity of schools, colleges, universities out there. It's hard to throw a blanket over them all that's going to cover them. I would say that as a general rule of thumb, your smaller private schools are going to be very, let's say, holistically focused on
Okay.
all of the P's.
Okay.
So they really take the time. And so I'd said, it took me 10 to 15 minutes to read an application. After I read the application, it went to another reader. Okay. So it wasn't just that one application was getting 10 minutes of review. It actually went through levels of review. Okay. And even after that second reader, if that student, let's say, were scholarship competitive, then it would come in front of a committee. So there were a lot of levels of evaluation. For a larger school, it may be shaved down a lot. So I'd mentioned University of Alabama, and this is on their website, so this is not proprietary information. But we would say if you could score a 21 in the ACT or 1,000 on the old SAT, I think it's been sort of reconfigured or modified since I was at the University of Alabama working there, and a 3-point GPA, then you should be successful at the University of Alabama. Okay. So again, that's not saying anything about an essay because we don't need that. It's not saying anything about class rank because we don't review that, which, speaking to Texans, it blows their mind because, like we were saying, University of Texas, A&M, all of the state universities around Texas look at rank as a pretty significant factor of their evaluation process.
Sure.
So, but you have schools that would be comparable to Rhodes around Texas, like an Austin College or a Southwestern University or a Trinity University in San Antonio, that probably have a process that's more similar in terms of looking at all the 5 Ps and trying to make determinations based off of that.
Okay. So just based on volume, you would say that the first 3 Ps are significant to everybody. The 4th and the 5th, personality and participation, just by the nature of being a large school, those are de-emphasized.
That's probably a fair assumption to make. And also the nature, even in working for a small university and a large state university, at the small university, my input was greater in each applicant. At a large state university, you're right, it's volume. So you have to pick an efficient way to do those. And I didn't have those stacks of applicants where I worked for a large state university. Those were on someone else's desk, hundreds of miles away from where I was. So, but I did have input in each applicant. So again, with those borderline ones, if those happen to come up and we have some concerns, or they fell below where we would tend to accept, and I felt that they would be a good fit. The onus was on me, to reach out and say, here's some.
You really need to consider
context.
This candidate.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk. The final thing that I wanted to kind of dive into was the technology piece, or so the Common App is the big boy on the street these days.
That's it.
So we were talking here before. So you said the Common App was started in 1975.
In 75, it was founded at least then.
Okay,
right.
So it's been around. That's before I
Which
even
is
applied
surprising.
to college.
No, when I learned that too, I thought, is that true? That seems like a lot older than I would have guessed.
Sure, but I think it's fair to say that the Common App didn't really rise to significance until the internet really took off.
Right.
So maybe and the internet boom was in the mid-90s.
And I know there are 700 member schools using the Common application, and about a third of those schools use it exclusively. So they don't have another app that they use. They just use the Common application. So it's taken off. It would be interesting to see the charted trajectory of how that's.
And in Texas, we have Apply Texas is another thing that Texas schools use.
It's almost like a Texas Common App.
Exactly.
Specific to the state. Right.
But I think that with all of these, though, you have, when I applied to colleges, I had to write an actual letter, put a stamp on it, lick the stamp, go to the school. They would mail me an application that I would fill out by hand, maybe type, and then I would send it back, and that's how I applied to colleges.
Right.
That's not how it works now.
Standard.
Yes. Nowadays, you open up your Common App, you fill out one application, and then you can send it wherever.
Right.
So what does that mean about volume?
Well, the paranoia, I remember in college admissions, I would often be asked, well, isn't there a deficit to doing the Common application? Because wouldn't you rather have applicants fill out your application? Yeah. And the answer is no. Either one's perfectly acceptable. In fact, all the schools that use the Common App agree that they won't give preferential treatment to their own application over the Common App. And the Common App was also developed with using the NACAC, National Association of College Admissions Counseling statement of principles and good practice. So, and that's something that almost all colleges and universities, accredited college universities, would be a part of NACAC too. But yeah, in terms of volume, so it's an interesting question. It benefits admissions offices because I'm sure their applicant numbers grew exponentially once the Common App was implemented and actually gained steam, which looked great because those metrics are looked at by the Board of Colleges and Universities. They're looked at by the public applying in terms of selectivity or the number of applications submitted. So it gives the school some really good numbers to put forward.
But it's maybe a false indicator, as it turns out.
Exactly. It's an unrealistic kind of inflated number, you might want to say, because it's easy to now click a button just to add another school on there and pay the application fee. But one you're not really interested in, you just might want to test the water, or it may be, or even a kind of a reach school, somewhere across the nation or something like that you're kind of just interested in how you might fare in their admissions process. But realistically, it might be I don't know, too far to travel, or it might be out of your financial ability to attend, or any number of factors that could prevent you from it being a more legitimate consideration.
Well, and I think that so the Common App isn't going away. Being able to one application, multiple schools. I mean, it's a really good idea for a lot of different reasons, and so it's not going away. One of the things that I find interesting, you'll see these news stories out there that say, so let me get your thoughts on this, that say, well, schools are no longer going to look at the SAT to decide whether they admit or whether they accept an applicant. So what do you think
that
about
tends to bubble up annually, I feel. And sometimes, I mean, the one that I think was the biggest scare for the SAT was California had threatened to not use it. And this was, I can't remember if I had to ballpark, I'd say like 2003, 2004, something like that. And so, again, you saw sort of a recentering. It's, the SAT or the College Board saying, okay, we're listening now, what we need to do to make sure that we keep the SAT or ACT in place. But so if they remove the SAT or ACT, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What you're doing is removing that standard measure that crosses all school lines in terms of what a student's learned. And again, if you have the ability to take the SAT or ACT multiple times, which to my knowledge, I think all college and universities allow, then I don't think you can say, well, I just had an off day, or I was sick on the testing day, or well, I'm just an anxious test taker, because you've had some practice with doing it and you've been able to get a measure of comfort, I would think, having the ability to take it multiple times. So I like having the measure of standardization in place. Personally, I think it's important, and I say that never having enjoyed taking standardized tests myself. Whether that be sort of in our world on the secondary school level, the IC exam, or the SSAT, or the GRE, which I took going into graduate school. All that stuff was kind of like nails on the chalkboard. But you prepare for it the best way that you can, and you go in there and you do what you can. And
that's the apples to apples. Like you kind of, if you don't have it in there, you don't have an apples to apples comparison on different candidates.
That's right.
And I would kind of argue that a lot of schools that have made a splash, they've said they're making it voluntary.
Okay.
So I think that then there's different motivations of why they would make it voluntary. If you have voluntarily provided your SAT scores and you made it a 1550, how would you compare to a candidate who didn't volunteer to provide their SAT scores?
Right. And why would you voluntarily provide it if you feel you didn't do very well on it? So what you would see is the highest, the highest achieving on the test being the only ones that submitted it, which how is that really beneficial to the admissions office?
And I also think that I think it's easy to see that colleges are all getting swamped with applications. I mean, because of the Common App, they're getting a lot more applicants. It's just easier to apply. You're saying that you said the average student applies to 8 colleges?
Yeah, I think that's the last statistic I heard.
Okay.
Was around
I mean,
8.
we had a student last year that applied to 18.
Yeah,
That's
and you hear
crazy.
those kinds of stories too. And
So-
application fees alone, that makes me cringe a little bit.
Right. So if you can just apply to a school with a push of a button, and schools are getting swamped, the only way that they can process these things more quickly is to look at some standardized tools and metrics, especially for the big schools, those schools that get a lot of applications.
Agreed. And do you know, or do you understand, I can only guess at this, but their motivation for making it optional or removing it altogether?
So what I have read
Okay.
is that the top tier schools all want to be able to report a very high average test score
Right.
for their students to make them more competitive against the other schools.
Sure.
And by removing reporting of the score as a requirement, it doesn't mean they're not going to use it,
Right.
but it does mean that they're no longer reporting that in their averages. So the
Okay.
students that have applied that have a lower score are not going to be in their average. So their average score is going to be even higher because they're saying. So I've heard that that's the
Yeah.
impact is that actually allows them to report a higher average SAT score because they're not requiring it.
But does that, I mean, a few thoughts on that. One, is that beneficial to the student that's applying because does it give them a sense of what kind of student it is at college or university, or if they would be successful because, well, I guess if they've taken the test and don't have to report it, at least they would kind of know from what's reported. But the reporting would be kind of inaccurate because you're not getting a representative sample of those that attend your university.
Yeah, I think they just don't accept the kids that don't report it.
Oh, okay.
That would be my guess. That unless they had just amazing other records, they're not going to take a risk on a kid that didn't
so it's
report
a very
it.
college-centric rule without much benefit to the applicant.
I think so. That's what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
it comes across as this really soft. We're no longer going to make you do standardized testing.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you don't do it, you're not going to get in.
Okay, I see what
I
you're
think.
saying now.
And in fact, we're going to look better as a college because we're no longer reporting on these kids that applied to our school that had lower scores.
Okay, I follow you. I had originally, when you had mentioned that point, I thought you were talking about the colleges, and maybe this is the soft part you were talking about, saying we don't want our students to be like boxed within a certain number, so we're not going to consider those kinds of numbers and focus maybe more on the personality and all that. But that's really not the case.
Well, the truth is I don't know.
Yeah.
But when I just from thinking it from my standpoint of saying they're swamped with applicants. How are they going to sort all of these applicants? Now they're saying they're not going to even look at test scores, and I'm thinking that doesn't line up.
No, it doesn't, because the test score review is probably one of the easiest things to review in and out. It's a number, you know, and of course there are subcategories of that number, but that's probably one of the easiest things to look at on an application.
Why would they not use that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like eliminating essays, eliminating interviews, those are the more time-consumptive parts, I would think, of applying.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. I know that I could just go on.
I know.
We could dig into all sorts of little details about this, and there's a lot of different schools that you could talk about on how they do it. And,
right.
But hopefully this has been beneficial to our audience to just hearing the 5 Ps and a little bit more about differences in schools and how they perceive that. We really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. I enjoyed doing it, and I appreciate the invite to come participate.
So where can our audience find you if they're looking to see Danny Kahalley a little bit more?
Come St. Thomas Episcopal School.
Okay.
You can usually find me there on most days.
Okay.
Yeah, but 4900 Jackwood. Check us out, stes.org.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
That went pretty decent, huh?
That's great, yeah.